Today we're going to factor a quadratic completely. So what exactly does that mean? Haven't we been factoring completely already? We really have, but now we're just going to take everything that we've learned through all of factoring and put it all together today. So to factor a quadratic completely, we need to get it into its simplest form. So everything is factored all the way down. So the best way to do this is first thing, look for a greatest common factor, factor that out, and then factor as normal if you have something quadratic left over. Remember, if something's quadratic, that means you have an x squared. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go through and find the greatest common factor of each of the expressions that we have. So what I like to do, and if you don't need to make the list, you absolutely don't have to, but if you are having trouble finding the greatest common factor, this is pretty helpful. So the first thing I want to do is I have this 20x squared. I'm going to find all of my factors of 20. So I have 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 4 and 5. And then I have x squared, so that's x times x. Then we have 35x. So the factors of 35 are 1 and 35, and 5 and 7. And then it has just an x. So what's the biggest number that they both have in common? The biggest number that both of them have in common is going to be 5. And then with x's, this one has 2 x's, this one just has 1. So that means we only have 1 x in common. So our greatest common factor here is going to be 5x. We'll factor it out here in a minute. We're just going to go through and find each of our greatest common factors in each of our expressions. Okay, so let's find all of the factors over here. Our first number is 4x squared. So the factors of 4 are 1 and 4, and then 2 times 2. And then we have x squared, so that's x times x. Now we have 8x, so 1 times 8, and 2 times 4 for the factors of 8, and then that has an x. And then our last number is 60. So 60 has a lot of factors. We have 1 and 60, 2 and 30, 3 and 20. Let's see, does 4 go into it? Yes, it does. 4 and 15, 5 and 12, 6 and 10. And it doesn't have any x's, so I don't need to worry about that. So now I'm going to look at what is the biggest number that they all have in common. It looks like the biggest number that they have in common is 4. This has 2 x's, this has 1 x, that last one doesn't have any. So that means that I cannot factor out an x since not all of the terms have 1 to give. So 4 is my greatest common factor. And like I said, I'm going to wait a minute and factor it out when I'm done finding the greatest common factor of all of these. Okay, 10x squared plus 48x minus 10. Let's find the factors of 10x squared. So my factors of 10 are 1 and 10, and 2 and 5. And x squared is x times x. Then I have 48x. So I'll have 1 times 48, 2 times 24, 3 times 16, 4 times 12, 6 times 8. And then that term has just one x on it. Our last term is 10. So we already have our factors over here of 10. That's 1 and 10. And 2 and 5. So now, what's the biggest factor that all of these guys have in common? The biggest factor that they all have in common is 2. Our first term has 2 x's, our second one has 1 x, and our last term doesn't have any x's. So that means I can't factor out an x. So my greatest common factor here is 2. All right, our factors over here, we got 12x squared, 33x, and 21. So let's find the factors of 12x squared. So we have 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. And since this is x squared, that means I have x times x. My second term is 33x, so my factors of 33 are 1 and 33, and 3 and 11, and that term has an x. And then my last term is 21, so I have 1 times 21, and 3 times 7 for that term. So, what is my greatest common factor? What do all of these terms have in common? They each have a 3 in common. My first term has 2 x's, my second term only has 1, and my third term doesn't have any, so I can't factor out any x's. My greatest common factor is going to be 3. So now let's go through and actually factor out that greatest common factor. So what does it mean to factor out? Remember, when we're factoring out, that's the opposite of when we distribute a number out. When we distribute, we multiply. So since I'm undoing that, that means I have to divide each term by that greatest common factor. So right here in this problem, my greatest common factor was 5x. So I'm going to divide each term by 5x. My greatest common factor comes out here in front. And then I have parentheses. In parentheses goes what these terms are that are divided by 5x. So when we take 20x squared divided by 5x, 20 divided by 5 is 4. And then we had 2 x's, took one of those out, so we're just left with the one left over. So that's 4x. Our sign in the middle is plus, so we're going to bring that on down. And then we'll take 35 divided by 5, that's 7. And then we had an x, but we took it out, so we don't have any x's left over. So we just have 4x plus 7 on the inside of our parentheses. In this problem, our greatest common factor was 4. So that means I'm going to take every term and divide by 4. That 4 comes out front of the parentheses. 4x squared divided by 4. The 4's divide away, so I'm just left with x squared. 8x divided by 4. Well, 8 divided by 4 is 2. And then I didn't have to take out an x, so that's going to stay. The sign right here is minus, so I'm going to bring that on down. And then 60 divided by 4 is 15. Our greatest common factor on this problem was 2, so we're going to go through and divide each term by 2. My greatest common factor comes out front of parentheses, and then we'll divide each of these guys. 10x squared divided by 2, well, 10 divided by 2 is 5, and I didn't have to take out any x's, so my x squared stays. Then I had a plus. Then we have 48x divided by 2. 48 divided by 2 is 24. And we still have that x there. And then we have a minus sign, so I'm going to bring that down. And then 10 divided by 2 is 5. Okay. Our greatest common factor in this last one was 3, so I'm going to take each term and divide it by 3. I'm going to keep my greatest common factor here out in front of my parentheses. 12x squared divided by 3 is 4x squared plus 33x divided by 3 is 11x plus, and then 21 divided by 3 is 7. Okay, so now that we've taken care of all of the greatest common factors, now we have to go through and factor more if we need to. How do we know if we need to factor more or not? We need to see, is what's in the parentheses quadratic? How do I know if it's quadratic? Quadratic means that there's an x squared. So if you still have an x squared, you need to keep going. If you don't have an x squared anymore, you're set, leave it alone, you're fine. Sound good? Cool. So let's take a look at this first one. I have 5x and 4x plus 7. So this is not quadratic. So don't factor more. We do not need to use this box at all. Okay, but over here, I have x squared plus 2x minus 15 on the inside of my parentheses. So I'm gonna have to keep on factoring. Okay, now here is my advice on greatest common factors and what to do with them after you've factored them out. If you have siblings, you will totally get this analogy. Treat your greatest common factor like a little sibling. Bring it along, keep it with you, but completely ignore it the entire time. But make sure you have it with you at the very end of everything. So my brother, when we were kids, he had to babysit me a lot because he's about 5 years older than me. And so one time he took me to the pool and he just ignored me the entire time and then straight up forgot me and then didn't bring me home. My mom was so mad. So don't be like my brother with your greatest common factors. Bring them along, but remember to bring them home, okay? Just ignore them, but you need to bring them home, okay? Cool. All right, so I'm going to completely ignore that 4, pretend like it's not there at all. So I'm going to factor this just like normal. My a term in front of my x squared is 1. So what I need to do is I need to multiply a times c. So 1 times negative 15. 1 times negative 15 is negative 15. And then my b value there is 2, the guy that's on my x. Let's go through and see which other problems need to be factored some more. In this problem right here on the inside of our parentheses is x squared. So since it's quadratic, I have to keep on factoring. Remember that 2 is our little sibling, so just ignore it, but remember to bring it with you. So I'm going to ignore that, and I know I need to multiply a times c. So my a is 5, and my c is negative 5. So 5 times negative 5 is negative 25. And the b value in there is 24. Okay, over here I ended up with a 4x squared plus 11x plus 7 on the inside. And since I have an x squared, it's quadratic, so I now have to keep on factoring. 3 is that greatest common factor, so I'm just going to ignore it and multiply a times c. My a is 4 and my c is 7. It's going to make that little rainbow. 4 times 7. And 4 times 7 is 28. My b value right here in the middle is 11. So now we're going to go through and factor just like we did in our last 2 lessons. So what we need to do is we need to look for all of our factors of negative 15. Remember, if you're really good at finding 2 things that multiply to negative 15 and add to 2, and you can do it like that, go for it. Who am I to say? If you're having a little bit of trouble with it, the list really, really helps. You can see everything that's going on. So if I'm multiplying to a negative number, that means that one number has to be positive and one number has to be negative. So my factors of negative 15, I'd have negative 1 and positive 15, positive 1 and negative 15, negative 3 and positive 5, positive 3 and negative 5. And then we would take all of our numbers in the left column and add them together in our right column. So negative 1 plus 15 is 14. 1 plus negative 15 is negative 14. Negative 3 plus 5 is 2. 3 plus negative 5 is negative 2. Our factors of negative 25, remember if I'm multiplying to a negative number, that means one of our numbers has to be positive, one of our numbers has to be negative. So the factors of negative 25 will be negative 1 and positive 25, or positive 1 and negative 25, and then positive 5 and negative 5. It doesn't really matter which order they're in because, one's positive, one's negative already. You're set. If you're hearing any weird noises, I apologize. My kitty is going a little bit nuts. She just got a hold of some catnip, so she's excited. Okay, now we got to add everything together in the left column into the right. So negative 1 plus 25 is 24. 1 plus negative 25 is negative 24. 5 plus negative 5 is 0. Over here, we need to find the factors of positive 28, and b is positive, so we know that both of these numbers have to be positive since they're adding to a positive number as well. So we'll have positive 1 and positive 28, 2 and 14. Kitty's going nuts. Let's see, 3 doesn't go into it. 4 goes into it. Let's see, that's 7 times. All right. And then we need to add things together on the left side into the right column. So 1 plus 28 is 29. 2 times 14, or 2 plus 14, is 16. And 4 plus 7 is 11. So now when we're going through and factoring, we want to find 2 numbers that multiply to whatever a times c is and adds to my b value in the middle. So right here, what multiplied to negative 15 and added to positive 2, that was negative 3 and positive 5. Over here, what multiplied to negative 25 and added to 24, that was negative 1 and positive 25. In this, what multiplied to 28 and added to 11, that was 4 and 7. So what do we do with these 2 numbers that we just found? We're undoing that distributing that we had done before. So I need to before we combined like terms, we had this term, that middle term, split up into two different guys. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to split our middle term. So in this next step, remember that greatest common factor is going to come along for the ride, but we're just going to completely ignore it. So here's what I do, and you don't have to use the same brackets, but it's just something that helps me organize. I know that I'm going to have to do a whole bunch of work on the inside of this stuff, and my 4 just needs to stay outside. So what I do is I take that 4 and then I put a bracket, and then I do everything on the inside like normal. But that helps me remember that I do have my 4 out front and not to forget about him. So I'm going to split my 2x into those two numbers that we found. So I'll have negative 3x and plus 5x. The pieces on either side are going to remain the same, x squared and negative 15. So let's do that in each of them. We're now going to go through and split the middle term on each problem. Over here, we will split our middle term. So my 2 is going to come out front. I'm going to put a big bracket. That 5x squared stays like it does. And we're supposed to split our 24x into negative 1 and 25. So I'll have negative 1x plus 25x. And then I still have that negative 5 there on the end. 3 was our greatest common factor here, and then we're going to put a big bracket. We're supposed to split that 11x into 4 and 7. So we still have that 4x squared, and now 4x squared, and then we have 4x and 7x to split that 11x. And then we still have that plus 7 at the end. Big ol' bracket. So now we're going to go through and do what's called factoring by grouping. Factoring by grouping is when we go and we find the greatest common factor of the first two terms and then the greatest common factor of the second two terms. So in this next step, that 4 is going to keep on coming along with me. And then what's my greatest common factor of x squared and negative 3x? X. So remember, to factor that out, we have to divide. I had x squared. I took one of those out, so I'm just left with x minus 3x divided by x. Well, the x's just cancel out, so I'm just left with 3. What's my greatest common factor of 5x and 15? The thing that they have in common is 5. So I'll have a plus 5 here. Then I have to divide each term by my greatest common factor. 5x divided by 5 is x. Then I had a minus in between. 15 divided by 5 is 3. Okay, now we'll look for the greatest common factor right here. All right, so first I got to bring down that 2. Don't want to forget about him. Now I need to look for what is my greatest common factor of 5x squared and negative 1x. Well, the only thing they have in common is x. So to factor that out, I'm going to divide my x out. So 5x squared divided by x, take out one of those x's, is just 5x minus, and then we have negative 1x. So when we divide that x out, all we're left with is the 1. Cool. And then what is my greatest common factor of 25x and negative 5? Greatest common factor there is 5. Ooh, I ran out of room. And we'll just erase this right here and write into it. That'll be all right. All right, so then 25x divided by 5 is 5x minus 5 divided by 5 is 1. oopsies, 3. Need to bring him along. And then we'll look for our greatest common factor of 4x squared and 4x. Well, what they have in common number-wise is a 4, and both of those have x. So 4x squared divided by 4x, 4 divided by 4 gets rid of the 4's. I had 2 x's, and I have 1 left over, so that's just x. Then I have a plus. 4x divided by 4x is 1. So I have x plus 1 inside of those parentheses. Plus. What's my greatest common factor of 7x and 7? 7. So 7x divided by 7 gives me x, and then plus. 7 divided by 7 is 1. Okay, so last step. Over here, we're going to take out what this term and this term have in common. All right, so I'm going to put my GCF out front again. What do x times x minus 3 and 5 times x minus 3 have in common? X minus 3. So I'll take that out. And then after I factor that out, I'm just left with the stuff in between, x plus 5. And now he's factored completely, and we're all done with that problem. We're going to bring down that greatest common factor, that 2. We're going to take out what x times 5x minus 1 and 5 times 5x minus 1 has in common. They have that 5x minus 1 in common. So then when we factor that out, we're just left with x plus 5. And now we're all done factoring that one. Last one, bring down our greatest common factor, that was 3. We're going to take out what 4x times x plus 1 and 7 times x plus 1 has in common. They both have an x plus 1. And then my second set of parentheses is going to be what's left over, 4x plus 7. So remember, if you got the same answers, but maybe they were in a different order, that's totally fine. Don't even worry about it. The only thing that I would say to be careful about is that 99% of the time, your greatest common factor is going to be out front. So try to just make sure that your number is out front, but your sets of parentheses can be in any order. All right, I miss you guys so much. I'll see you later. Bye.